Hello and welcome to Sage's Tabletop Table Talks. I'm Sage, this is my tabletop, and I'm going to talk to you about tabletop role-playing games. Let's have a nice, fun, and lighthearted episode today. Let's talk about racial essentialism in tabletop role-playing games. And why it's a problem, why we're actually starting to fix it. It's actually one I've had kind of on the docket for a while now. I just never really got around to it. And it's kind of funny now that 2024, whether you like it or hate it, has actually gone a huge way of fixing this. But let's kind of talk about it, shall we? Because I still think it's a very prevalent thing in the tabletop role-playing game community, especially among things like retro clones and kind of older legacy games like Shadowrun. But what is the idea of racial essentialism? And that is this idea that, if you're familiar with the idea of what's called a monoculture, this idea that elves are this way. Elves exist in this very restrictive set of cultural and racial attributes. Same with dwarves. Dwarves, you know, this idea that dwarves are all gruff and they all have a Scottish accent for some reason, and you know they have, you know, they drink a lot, and you know they don't have a lot of sense of humor and things like that. And elves are all flighty and they like to dance and sing. And as far as coming from there is some truth to that. Like, coming from an elven nation, if you grew up in an elven nation, it would probably be one of those things where it would be heavily encouraged for you to learn song and swordplay, whereas in a dwarven nation, it would be heavily encouraged for you to learn gem working and smithing. But, like, let's say, hypothetically, you are an elf. And I'm talking about older editions of Dungeons & Dragons, who grew up in a human-dominated city. Why would it be this major thing that you would learn archery, swordplay, and singing? Hi, Jelly. And the answer is because elves are elves. They have a very restrictive... Why don't you not knock over the stuff my camera's sitting on? But elves are elves, and elves, even if they weren't raised around other elves, they just can't help their elfness. It's just in their nature, it's just in their blood. And you start to really see some very unfortunate real-world parallels with certain people's ways of thinking when you see this, you know. Oh, people of color, it's just in their nature. It's just in their genetics to commit crime, you know. You're designing a RPG based on a very, very shitty person designing an RPG based on, you know, more modern real world might give, you know, people of color, black individuals, bonuses to things like thievery and things like that because it's just in their blood. It's just in their nature. This is just how it is. And give me 1 second. My cats are being bad. Callie, get out there. But yes, anyway, but yes, you can kind of see where there's a certain way of thinking in that is not good. But let's kind of bring it back to let's kind of bring it back to the game space. You create this very narrow space for people to actually play in when you do stuff like that. So, okay, once again, look at elves. You know, let's say elves get, in your game, particularly elves get a bonus to their dexterity and their intelligence, but they suffer in their constitution. So what that means is if you're playing a character, an elf, you get a penalty to your constitution and a bonus to your intelligence. This means that, as a player, this was Pathfinder's setup, I believe. I don't remember what 5th edition was. But as a player, you realistically cannot play a barbarian as an elf. That -2 constitution absolutely hurts you because it limits how much rage you can do versus that dwarf that gets +2. Effectively, that dwarf has a +4 advantage on, or not, a 4-point advantage on that rage that the elf no longer has. That same with that elf getting a +2 to their intelligence. Dwarves don't get a -2, but they're even. Effectively, what this means is if you want to play a barbarian, you cannot be an elven barbarian. Even if you want to build a character who, as a barbarian, who was, an elf who was raised by, like, a Viking tribe, you are just flat out punished for it, Oh, well, they're automatic proficient with long swords and longbows, and even if you are playing a barbarian, you are proficient with it, but, like, if you're wanting to play, like, a great axe, great sword, it's like, okay, but why would my character have all this extra ability in, sword, fencing style? Well, it's because elves are elves. No matter what your backstory is, no matter what, you've built toward them, elves are elves. Oh, I want to play a dwarven wizard. Dwarves can't be wizards. Why not? Dwarven wizard. That's just silly. That's silly talk. Actually, no. Have a dwarven bard, because pretty sure they get -2 charisma. I want to play a dwarven bard. Dwarves can't be bards. I know everybody, for some reason, identifies them Viking-ish, which other than axes, I really don't see where the whole dwarf Viking thing comes from that some people kind of correlate. But whatever. It's like, I want to be, once again, Vikings, who, the word, who, not the word, but, they didn't have skulls. They didn't have a whole dedicated cultural thing toward, people who are musicians. But if you want to play a dwarf who's a musician, who's a bard, no, just don't. You can't. I want to play a dwarf who made a pact with an eldritch being. I want to play a dwarven warlock. No, don't be a dwarven warlock. Dwarven sorcerer. Dwarves don't have magic in their bloodline. Have you seen a dwarf? No dragon's gonna fuck a dwarf and create a sorcerer. And it creates very limiting play spaces. 2025 Dungeons and Dragons, 2024, sorry, actually pulled that out of racial things. And for the most part now, racial traits are things that would be physical traits that the characters would have. In a lot of ways. The human one's still kind of weird where you get an extra origin fee. But whatever. Versatile humans. You get things like Dragonborns get their wings and their breath weapon. Which, if we're honest, if you're playing a Dragonborn, whether you were raised in a Dragonborn city, an Elven city, or a human city, you would still be born as a dragon. You would still have your, breath weapon, because like I said, in the current campaign I'm playing in, I am a Cloud Giant Goliath. The Misty Step, the ability to do the short-range teleport. No matter how I was raised or where my character was from, the ability to kind of poof is something that would be a physical trait that would be genetically disposed to that character. They moved the trait boost to backgrounds, which is kind of fine, but it still creates the space where if you're trying, excuse me, if you're trying to build a good character, if you're trying to build kind of a weird off-the-wall character, like let's say you were a wizard who originally was a farm boy and he left this farm to study sorcery, or he was kidnapped by a wizard and was meant to be a wizard's, like this wizard's, you know, errand boy, and he had studied magic behind the wizard's back, so now he's a wizard. So if you start as a farmer into wizard, nothing in that farmer background, which is, I believe, is strength, constitution, wisdom, nothing there actually aids you in your wizard, so you are effectively just losing out on an actual boost that would be beneficial to from a different background, like a scribe or whatever. Still, it's step in the right direction, 2024. Realistically, your stat boost should come from your class. Wizards get an intelligence boost because wizards, the act of being a wizard makes you smarter. Barbarians should get a strength or constitution boost because the act of training as a barbarian makes you hardier. Clerics should just get a wisdom boost because the act of studying as a cleric makes you wiser and more kind of focused and in tune. Which Pathfinder 2nd Edition does do that, which I do greatly appreciate. Unfortunately, they still suffer that racial essentialism where you're just like, oh yeah, you know, as a cat folk, you get a bonus to dexterity and a penalty to your intelligence, and that's just what you get for being a cat folk. So, you want to be a cat folk wizard? Fuck you. Fuck you. But I guess it's still a step in the right direction from certain other games. Shadowrun certainly comes to mind. And I know people out there are going to make an argument with me because despite how kind of garbage of a system Shadowrun is, people like it because there is this cultural momentum from Shadowrun that people have, or they have convinced themselves it's some, like, masterpiece, and it's really not. But, similarly, there's this thing. You want to play a troll. And trolls have high maximums in their physical stats, their strength, and their stamina. I can't remember. I think they call it endurance in Shadowrun. I don't remember off the top of my head. But they get a penalty to, like, logic and intuition. And so if you want to play a hacker or decker, yeah, you can play a troll hacker, but let's be honest, the game actively punishes you for doing that over playing a human or an elf hacker. Who don't have these huge penalties to their, you know, logic stat. And that's just kind of the trick is, if you want to play a character that isn't your standard character, these games punish you for it. And then there's the OSR, and I know people but you know, my antagonism toward the OSR, the old school revolution, renaissance, revival, whatever the fuck you guys want to call it, kind of the antagonism I have toward this style of game design is not a secret. But cat's scratching that shit. But yeah, but like where they just straight up out and out deny characters. Who's ever heard of a dwarven wizard? Dwarves just can't be wizards. It doesn't matter if you grew up, you know, your character was built around, you know, oh, dwarf, and he grew up in an elven city and, you know, learned their ways. You just can't be a dwarven wizard. That's stupid. No one's ever heard of a dwarven wizard. As a dwarf, you can play a fighting man or a cleric or a fighting man cleric, but you can't escape those rules because those are the rules that dwarves get to be. And plus, you get a penalty to your intelligence, so why would you even want to play a dwarven wizard? We're we're doing you a favor by telling you you're not allowed to play this character class this race class combination. And it's like, forever and ever and ever, I used to play humans just because humans never really got that, where they were just basically told, they were basically just shut out of certain character designs, unlike other ones. Like I said, you know, dwarves get -2 charisma in 3rd edition. You want to play a dwarf who will play a bard, literally, fuck you. You are literally just universally worse at being a bard than somebody who's playing a human or an elf. And likewise, even getting bonuses like 5th edition had, you know, tieflings got a bonus to charisma. Why? Because Hasbro Wizards of the Coast want you to play a tiefling warlock. That's why. Warlocks are charisma based and tieflings are charisma based simply because they want you to play a tiefling warlock. They have locked this idea in that tieflings are warlocks, and most warlocks are probably tieflings, because I've got a whole video set aside for warlocks. I fucking despise warlocks with a passion. If there was a class I could excise from Dungeons and Dragons, it would be warlocks for a litany of reasons. 2024 fixed a couple of them, but I fucking hate warlocks. And I used to fucking hate tieflings because they're a perfect example of what I'm talking about with this racial essentialism. Tieflings are warlocks. Warlocks are tieflings. That's the way it's supposed to be played. Fuck your creativity. Fuck your original designs. That's not how this game works. This game where you're supposed to be able to like create these huge fantasy worlds and huge epic stories that are your own creation. Okay, as long as you play within our confines, as long as you play within the box we've created, that tieflings are warlocks, and elves are wizards, and halflings are rogues, as long as you play within this little play space, you can tell whatever story you want. Like I said, if it was up to me and I was going to give bonuses, and actually that's how I do it in the system I'm designing, you get a randomly, I have physical and mental stats. You get a randomly assigned boost to one of those, which I just designed to kind of give you like a little bit of play space. And then you pick one physical, one attribute to boost, one physical, one mental attribute to boost, and then the class you pick. Because the idea was, you know, you're born with certain advantages, you decide to train certain advantages, and then when you become old enough to start, you know, building your class, I guess it would be, you know, when you're old enough to decide you want to be a fighter, the act of training to be a fighter gives you certain advantages. You know, it gives you an advantage to your, you know, strength or constitution, and it gives you an advantage to your willpower perception, because they get physical and mental attributes. Pick one, they get two, a choice of one or the other. And they can't go above 2 during character creation. But yeah, you know, fighters, you know, yeah, people don't understand, you know, the mental skill of being a fighter, even though being a active fighter, a soldier, or a martial artist does require a great deal of mental acumen. I give them perception and willpower because willpower is representative of the dedication and the mental conditioning they have, and perception because as somebody who is a fighter, a martial artist, a soldier, you very, very much have to be aware of your surroundings, as well as be able to pick up on the physical cues your opponent's putting out towards you. And I know that realistically, sword fighting requires every possible attribute you have, because as somebody who studied martial arts and especially weapon fighting, the idea that it's not a strength or not a is all a lie. You have to be strong, fast, smart, aware, you know, quick-witted. You have to be able to read people. You have to have a great deal of stamina because it's fucking hard to swing a sword around. Yeah, they're only 3 fucking pounds, but it's a 3-pound metal bar you're holding out trying to constantly maneuver with speed and, you know, with speed and force, you know, it's requires the great, but that's a different rap for a different day. But yeah, but that's kind of it, is like, I think that I don't necessarily mind the fact that backgrounds grant you stat boosts. Pathfinder 2nd edition, I think, has a fairly decent system where, so all your stats start at 10s, and then you pick a race, and the race should go away. That actually should go away. But I think, you know, okay, well, then you pick a background. What were you? Well, I was a farmer. Okay, as a farmer, you can add a boost to your stamina or wisdom or strength, because those are the things that as a farmer you would naturally be trained at. Okay, well, what's your class? My class is a fighter. Okay, as a fighter, you can get a boost to your strength, your dexterity, or constitution, because as a fighter, those are going to be kind of the natural skills, the natural attributes you're going to build onto as you train in that way. You know, oh, I'm a wizard. Okay, well, you get a boost to your intelligence or your wisdom, because as somebody who's training in the arcane arts, those are going to be the attributes that you just naturally build while you're doing that particular form of training. And so it's like, I just, the idea that as an elf, you will always and forever be because of a boost to a stat, or, you know, boost your dexterity. As an elf, you will forever and always be a better rogue than a human, a dwarf, or a gnome will ever be. And there's just nothing that anyone can do about it, because that's just the way it is. Or, like I said, the thing, it drives me nuts. I know I've talked a lot about attributes, but that's because that's a huge part of this. But, like, it drives me insane, like, this idea that elves, as an elven wizard, oh, I'm still proficient with long swords and long bows and rapiers. Why? Well, elves just train in swordplay and archery. Okay, but my elf didn't grow up in an elven city. Literally, I played an elf that ran away from an elven city and spent most of their lives in a human city learning magic. He was a wizard, but, like, he had no cultural ties to his elven home. So why would he give a shit about swordplay or dance or archery? Even if he trained from a kid up, you know, he spent the last, you know, as an elf. Well, I mean, if you shift it to a human time, he has spent what would be to a human effectively the last 12 years in a human city, not training in swordplay, not training in archery, not training in dance, not training in fencing. Yeah, he probably at one point maybe did know how to pick up a rapier, but that shit's long gone. There's nothing left of that. He's going to pick up that blade and he's going to be awkward. And yeah, maybe he would, if he went to a fencing school, would probably pick it up faster than a new person because of those handful of years he spent in Elf City doing elf stuff. But, like, to rely on that in a fight, to be proficient with that weapon, is absurd. It just doesn't make any sense. But he can do it because elves are elves, and that's all an elf will ever be. And honestly, basic D&D, back in the day, D&D basic, elves were elves. If you want to play an elf, you played elf. You want to play a dwarf, you played dwarf. Not dwarven fighting man, not elven wizard, you were elf. You were dwarf, you were hobbit. And they kind of were built like a class. And it's like racial essentialism to the extreme, but at least they're not pretending. They are just saying, like, okay, this is what a dwarf is. And it was realistically built that way because people talk about how Dungeons and Dragons is meant to be like a very Tolkien-esque, very Lord of the Rings style game. But honest to God, the truth of that is Lord of the Rings was not really an influence in the creation of Dungeons and Dragons. That's very much a misnomer. As a matter of fact, Gygax didn't really care for it. And it's why the demi-humans are actually kind of garbage in the games. The game drew much, much heavier influence from stories like Conan the Barbarian. Which is why everything is so human-centric. Because he wanted you to play Conan the Barbarian, not Lord of the Rings or Dying Earth. Because that's where the magic system from D&D comes from. Vancian casting comes from Jack Vance's Dying Earth saga. So, yeah, it's like, okay, fine, you want to play an elf? Here's your stupid fucking elf. Here's what elves do. I don't give a fuck. They're wake up one day and they pick to be a fighter or a wizard. There you go. What's a dwarf? Yeah, a dwarf is a kind of like a fighting man, but it takes a lot longer for him to level up and get, I don't know, the ability to find north underground. Whatever. And yeah, so yeah, that was just pure, but there's almost a relief to it just because there's no pretense, no pretend. Dwarves are all from Dwarfland and they all act like dwarves, and elves are all from Elfland and they all act like elves, and hobbits are all from Hobbitland and they all act like hobbits, and that's just it. But yeah, so 2024 has finally moved everything in very, very much the right direction after, you know, quite a long, and, you know, I do think that there's some discussion of D&D culture that I think is invented by Twitter to get mad about something. But I absolutely agree with this idea of racial essentialism, just because I think that, not just because, obviously, but, you know, from what I do on this channel, you know, obviously it sucks to be like, oh yeah, all you know, all hobbits are thieves, you know, all people of this certain thing are angry, you know, all half-orcs are just angry, strong dudes who smash and don't think, and there's very unfortunate implications in that, but strictly from a storytelling standpoint, it's boring because you create a situation. Yes, most half-orcs are probably brain over brawn, but you're a hero. You're not the average Joe. You should be allowed to be the exception to the rule. You should be allowed to be the half-orc who's a scholar and, you know, a thinker. But giving a player a mechanical -2 just literally prevents them from playing that character. Well, yes, a 16 intelligence does mean you're still really fucking smart. But you could have had an 18, if not for that penalty. And that's a problem, because you are just penalized for playing outside of the box that Wizards of the Coast has decided to put you in. But yeah, I guess that's really it. Just like, it's a step in the right direction. Just, it so heavily limits storytelling, and play opportunity for players. From a storytelling standpoint, it sucks because it literally limits the stories you're allowed to tell. And from a player standpoint, it sucks because your kind of cool idea, that kind of cool thing you want to play, that you think would be really interesting to play, you can still play it. You can still play your half-orc wizard, but you are just punished for it. There is nothing but stick for trying to play it, and no carrot. And that's not fun. That's not enjoyable to most players. You're going to get them assholes out there like, I enjoy playing suboptimal characters. It's a role-playing opportunity. No, it's not. It's not a role-playing opportunity. You're just a fucking snob. Shut the fuck up. You're not helpful to the conversation. I mean, you're just not helpful to the conversation. Shut the fuck up. To 99% of us, it's not fun to play characters that are purely suboptimal because someone else decided that that's a story we're not supposed to tell. But anyway, I guess that's it. So, have fun, and sorry this was a day late. My schedule just kind of made it so I couldn't post this on Monday night, Tuesday morning, so it's got to be Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. Sorry, but, you know, this isn't my job. I do this for fun, so sometimes scheduling is going to get in the way. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys next week. We'll just kind of see where the wind takes us there. But anyway, bye. Have fun. May you roll lots of whatever the high roll for the particular game you want to play is. And if you want to gatekeep or snob in this community, just go find another community to ruin because you're just a dick. Goodbye.